American dominance is fading because internal forces are actively dismantling it, creating a shift in the global order. In early 2066, the post-Cold War international order is breaking apart because of rising, aggressive competition. This period of instability marks a significant shift as long-standing global alliances face unprecedented pressure from new geopolitical tensions. For decades, the United States was the only superpower, running a global system of institutions, trade deals, and security alliances to keep the peace. Thus, unipolarity kept global trade and diplomacy predictable, even if it favored American interests. We are now in the Great Fragmentation. This era features breaking global ties, localized wars, and a new, aggressive race for technological dominance across the globe. Global ties used to prevent war, but now nations cut supply chains and digital networks to guard their own borders, prioritizing domestic security over international cooperation. This split happened intentionally. It follows 10 years of changing economic models and the rising power of global South nations, which has fundamentally reshaped the global landscape. Developing nations now use their growing economic power to reject specific policy demands from Western powers. Washington no longer runs a single global marketplace. Instead, we are seeing a violent shift in how world power is distributed. New powers are actively changing how global diplomacy and trade-based competition work, reshaping the fundamental structures of international relations. Today's main conflict isn't just about trade deficits or border disputes. We are actually seeing a direct clash between two different, incompatible visions for how humanity should move forward. These opposing global visions were clearly articulated at the 2026 Munich Security Conference, where US officials called for a new Western century. One side wants to maintain a Western-centric, unipolar order. Beijing is actively pushing for a different, multipolar reality instead, challenging the current global power structure. One side wants to keep current hierarchies, but the other wants to replace them with a multi-centered global system. The United States is turning inward, leaving a gap in the global institutions that previously managed international stability and order. This US retreat from global leadership lets rival powers step in and actively rewrite existing international rules. The US-China power struggle is changing global politics. By 2026, these tensions will force every nation to rewrite their fundamental security and trade rules for survival. In early 2066, the international diplomatic system faced a massive shock. This sudden shift forced traditional allies to quickly renegotiate their existing security and trade alliances. The United States is pulling funding from dozens of United Nations agencies and several key global institutions. This sudden budget cut effectively ends the era of multilateral forums that managed global crises for nearly a century, dismantling long-standing systems of international cooperation. This policy retreat represents a significant loss of global influence that Beijing is currently moving to exploit with incredible, calculated speed. China isn't just filling gaps. Beijing is actively constructing new systems to replace departing Western institutions. With Washington withdrawing, China is starting a massive diplomatic push to act as a new, stable global power. This branding aims to influence nations that feel ignored by the current state of American foreign policy. Beijing is positioning itself as a stable leader, directly opposing what it calls the chaotic and hegemonic US foreign policy. China claims to protect global order to undermine American influence and weaken US leadership worldwide, which creased unexenten, Xi's understanden enterprises. The intense fight for political legitimacy reached its absolute peak during the high-stakes February 2026 Munich Security Conference. The conference, usually a platform for Western unity, showed deep ideological splits instead, revealing growing fractures within the global order. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave a speech that unsettled many leaders across the global South. Many analysts argued his comments threatened the sovereignty of emerging nations, potentially undermining their independent political agency. Rubio wants to undo the decolonization of the last century, openly pushing to bring back great Western empires. This vision seeks to reverse decades of global shifts towards sovereignty. This controversial stance fundamentally broke the long-standing post-Huawei commitment to the principle of self-determination. He also attacked global South anti-colonial movements, calling them a nefarious plot by godless communists. This rhetoric framed these sovereignty-seeking struggles as mere ideological threats to the existing order. This rhetoric pushed many neutral nations away from their previous stance between the two competing superpowers. This rhetoric backfired, letting China frame itself as the primary defender of national sovereignty and a multipolar global order. China uses American aggression to justify expanding its own global influence. As the US debates its imperial history, China expands its military and economic reach through new, integrated regional alliances. Through this format, China boosts its standing by providing alternatives to the American way of order, even if it is not yet fully replacing that order. In January 2026, BRICS 1 nations carried out large-scale joint naval exercises near South Africa's coast, demonstrating increased maritime cooperation through coordinated fleet maneuvers. This massive operation showed maritime groups can work together without relying on Western-led coalitions. This wasn't a routine drill. It brought together navies from China, Iran, Russia, South Africa, and the UAE. These competing navies operating together signaled that a single, unified bloc had formed, marking a significant shift in maritime security. Brazil, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Indonesia also attended the summit as observers, following a diplomatic framework led by China to expand regional influence. This unsettled moment is defined more by disorder than by order, as China uses its growing weight in BRICS to provide alternatives to the American way of order. Beijing is using these maneuvers to build a military-backed alternative to the current American-led global order. And this shows how military power is moving from unipolarity toward a multipolar reality, shifting global dynamics. Trade route control drives this economic fight, especially regarding the stability of global shipping lanes. Controlling these critical maritime choke points is now a central, high-stakes part of modern national security strategy. Geopolitical tensions are forcing everyone to look at the Panama Canal once again. Growing trade friction makes control of this waterway a major geopolitical dispute, intensifying global competition. Beijing is expanding its maritime power, leaving the US and its allies facing a dependency risk much like their current rare earths reliance. People worry that controlling global trade routes allows nations to use shipping lanes as political leverage. This threat hits more than just ships, it targets the global economy's core infrastructure. As strategic control intensifies, nations are now fighting over critical ports and pipelines. The Global South is now pulling much more weight in the world economy, rapidly increasing its overall share of global production and trade. This shift represents a permanent structural change in global wealth and productivity levels across the world. By 2005, the Global South's share of world GDP in purchasing power parity hit 34%. This era of fragmentation is driven by reasons why the old order broke, as middle powers may now define a new one. The United States held only 15%, while China held 21%. This widening disparity shows the economic gap between the West and East is shrinking. By 2050, the Global South will likely comprise 45% of the world economy, according to current economic projections. By 2050, the world's economic center will no longer be in the Atlantic, as global trade dynamics shift toward new emerging powers. In that same window, the United States' share is expected to drop to 11%. This decline means America is losing the economic leverage that previously supported its global dominance. China will likely peak in the 2030s, remaining a central part of this new global economic reality as its influence continues to shape international trade and markets. As competition intensifies, China's share of the global economy is projected to peak in the 2030s, even as the Global South's share is expected to reach 45% by 2050. These shifting numbers actually redistribute how much power nations have to write and enforce the world's global rules. Shifting wealth changes who actually writes international law and trade rules, fundamentally altering global governance. Technology is also volatile, as the tech war turns into a direct fight for digital sovereignty. The US-China relationship will define the next generation of international relations. This era of increasing fragmentation is driven by growing tensions over technology. Ready development and parallel metaverse creation are happening now, moving beyond science fiction into actual, measurable competition. Developments in Red A and the creation of parallel metaverses are actively shaping different virtual worlds. The US and China are creating two separate, incompatible digital ecosystems. The US and China are shaping different virtual worlds, a development that contributes to an increasingly fragmented global landscape. The late 2205 diplomatic truce looks shaky. This brief calm was just a temporary pause in tensions, not a real resolution to the underlying conflicts. Trump and Xi met in Busan in October 2025 to negotiate a one-year truce. During this critical period, leaders used the summit to stop a full-scale escalation of global tensions. They signed cooperation guidelines, yet the core structural competition still goes unresolved. This fragile truce ultimately failed because deep-seated trade and tech disputes remained fundamentally unresolved. Larger powers are now competing to control their neighbors, which is shifting regional power dynamics. Nations are once again fighting for control over specific regional spheres. The Trump administration is increasing its interest in Greenland's strategic value. The global order is being rewritten in real time, and the decisions made in the next few years will define the next century. Subscribe to Coffee Break News for weekly analysis on the forces reshaping our world, and drop a comment below. Do you think the US can reverse its decline, or is a multipolar world now inevitable?